To the world, you're known as probably the most successful and wealthiest doctor on the planet. But do you see yourself as a scientist, an entrepreneur, or maybe a humanitarian first? How do you look at yourself?
A doctor and a healer that could actually make an impact at the scale. I still see patients, by the way. Talk to patients, see patients. I was born in South Africa during apartheid. I understand the underdog. My job is to fight for the underdog, always. As soon as you give the chemotherapy and as soon as you give the radiation of such high dose, you wipe out the missing link of the cell that you didn't realize exists in your body to protect you from cancer, called the natural killer cell. What I'm really worried about is this virally induced cancers that's happening now.
This man is trying to save the world, and I believe he's on the right path. His work over the last 30 years at trying to cure cancer has culminated in drugs that he has produced that now work. Bladder cancer, lung cancer are all being treated and approved in Saudi Arabia and in the United States. And the approvals are just coming through here in the Middle East and in Europe.
The world followed America in getting these antibody-based vaccines. And that decision-making process, if you had a COVID virus infection, you increase the risk of breast cancer. So this combination of inflammation from some infection like COVID, together with a reduction in your protective lymphocytes, these natural killer cells are called lymphocytes, your white cells in your body. Between that combination, you expose and have the risk of cancer.
Cancer impacts every single one of us in some way, whether that's a family member, ourselves, a friend, or a colleague. And if this man can cure cancer, he's going to be one of the world's biggest heroes. Please welcome to the show the billionaire doctor, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong.
I've never seen a 10-year-old, 11-year-old with pancreatic cancer. I'm now seeing colon cancer. So my fear is we're going to see, just like HPV, after 5 years in man, if it's true, and we'll be reporting a little bit more of that. I don't want to disturb the world here. A pandemic of cancer.
Wow. First of all, welcome and thank you for coming on the show today. It's a real privilege to have you here. We've been following your work for some time, and although you're maybe not known as much here in the Middle East at the moment, okay, you're soon to be very well known. But what are your first impressions of this part of the world compared to where you're from and where you grew up?
Well, it depends from I grew up or where I am. So I grew up in South Africa. That's a little different than where I am right now is America. But I'm impressed by the youth that's out here. I mean, and that is, you have been in Saudi Arabia and maybe here, the average age around 35 years old. And so the vibrancy of the youth and the education of the people and the energy. So I was really impressed by that.
I've been here for a long time, and there seems to be all the time more people wanting to move to this part of the world. And as a 55-year-old man, when I was 30, the thought of that would seem unimaginable. But everyone seems to be leaving for whether they're running from something or they're running to something because of their lack of belief in governments.
Yeah.
And, I'm from the UK, and so that's very strong at the moment. We don't believe that the government is being honest with us. We don't believe the government is supporting us. So we need to now find another way. Not very British to leave. The British is to stand steadfast. When you consider governments around the world and you look at what's happening today, surely you must be rather frustrated with what you've seen over recent years.
Well, frustrated is one word. Concern is more the other, right? I think we've gone from, after World War II, and there was supposed to be some level of unity and everything else, and it looks like now there's this pulling apart, and I worry about civilization, frankly, even bigger than that. So the arguments aren't really arguments any longer, where, you could have disagreements, and you can have polite disagreements, or discourse, even emotional disagreements. But I think it's gone beyond that today. I think the polarization that's happening is really disturbing. And, I run the Los Angeles Times and trying to sort of figure out how we allow everybody's voices to be heard. Um, and then you talk about opinions. People allowed to have opinions. Anybody's allowed to have opinions, but everybody seems to have a different set of facts. So that's part of this issue that I think is really disturbing when you look at what's going on.
When you deal with facts, that's an important word because people interpret information they receive predominantly now from social media
Yeah.
than anything else. And they consider that information as facts. I remember a few years ago, they said people believed Google more than they believed their mother. That kind of resonated with me a lot
Yeah.
then with my kids.
Well, now it gets even worse, right? So I've seen some deep fakes that I couldn't tell. Yesterday we just did a little dictation of what was in my head with regard to thoughts about how to speak about to the lay audience about the really profound things we were working on in terms of longevity and cancer. And it went into this AI, and all of a sudden it came out as a podcast with two people having this conversation. It was remarkable. So it's hard to know soon what are facts and what's real.
Do you think that will end up going full circle where people will only end up trusting someone they can shake their actual hand with?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know if it'll go full circle. I think this is here to stay. This is this next evolution. But you're right. I mean, right now we know of deep fake where people take your ID, actually mimic your voice, get a job, get through the passwords, hack the computer, hack the system. It's disturbing, but there will be solutions for this in things like blockchain and things like technology that will actually have to now counter these deep fakes.
And do you have a great interest in learning about that?
Well, more than learning about that, we were one of the earliest blockchain inventors. We filed the patents on blockchain. And that's one of the security ways it's cumbersome. And very early on my career, we started machine vision in 2010 and ran a thing called Net Mobile, where you could, for me, it was so blind to be able to see money, where you can't do Braille. So we're really familiar and aware of that. But I think the idea it's getting so sophisticated now with the GPUs and everything else, and the speed at which things get generated, it's going to be, I think there'll be 5 to 10 years of this great uncertainty until you figure out how you figure out this next evolution.
Yeah, good point. Now, to the world, you're known as probably the most successful and wealthiest doctor on the planet. You own a part of a very famous basketball team. You own a newspaper. But do you see yourself as a scientist, an entrepreneur, or maybe a humanitarian first? How do you look at yourself?
None of that.
Okay.
I see myself as a doctor and having to have a curious scientific brain. I almost think of myself as a physicist, looking at your body as a biological system and trying to delve out what's going on in there so we can have an impact on you as a patient. So I don't know what you call that, but really is a doctor and a healer that could actually make an impact at scale. If you happen to talk about money and billionaire and all these other things, I don't see myself in that way at all, actually.
So your identity is still as a doctor as it was 50 years ago.
Exactly.
That's
Everything I'm doing I still see patients, by the way.
uh-huh.
I talk to patients, see patients.
Is that where you get your kick, your thrill? Is that comes from
Well,
that?
the thrill, there's both. Right now, there's a pain because I'm seeing very young children now with cancer. I've never seen a 10-year-old, 11-year-old with pancreatic cancer. I'm now seeing colon cancer. And then the joy, of actually seeing the hope, and then the joy of actually seeing the recovery. So I think all of that. And then really the greatest joy I get is the discovery. I think the highest kick you can get is knowing something for that moment in time that nobody else knows or thinks about in medicine. And there's so many. I mean, last night I had this big meeting in Riyadh, and I was revealing I've spent forever asking the question, why don't sharks get cancer? And I literally went and scraped cartilage to figure out, is there something that's cartilage? And it turns out none of that. And it's about evolution. And it turns out that it evolved all the way down to camels. So I started revealing about why camels don't get cancer. And that evolves into a technology that we're about to release in the UK and do a first-in-man clinical trial. So, and everything I've said right now is a mystery to probably 99% of
Maybe
humans
more.
on the planet. But it's fun to know that you have an idea that is there, and you're going to prove it out. If it's right, it's the highest high you can have.
I work in medical insurance.
In what?
Medical insurance.
Okay.
And so here in the United Arab Emirates, medical insurance is compulsory. Health insurance is compulsory. And so I have a business that provides insurance to companies, and those companies obviously have to cover their employees. Cancer is a worry always for employers for two reasons. One, economically, okay, and the other one for the well-being of their employees, because so many people get cancer compared to 20, 40, 60 years ago by comparison. When we look at cancer, for the benefit of everybody watching now that isn't exposed or touched or moved in any way by cancer, what is cancer? How does it start? Where does it come from? And how do people get it?
So if you look at, these are the kinds of crazy thoughts that I've had since medical school, because I started working on stem cells and how your body generates and keep your cells alive. In order for you to have a kidney or heart or any organ in your body, it has to regenerate literally from stem cells. If your stem cells aren't growing, you literally wouldn't have a physical muscle in your heart by the age of 14. So it turns out that every time you have these stem cells grow mathematically, some of them are what we call precancerous. So why does everybody not have cancer when they're healthy? And what that turns out to be is something that was only discovered in the 1970s, that you and I have a cell in our body that floats around called the natural killer cell, that is the first responder to look for these cells and clean them up and kill them. That's the real name of these cells, the natural killer cell. And when that natural killer cell gets disturbed or decreased or lowered, you get cancer. And when that natural killer cell decreases as you age, you have early mortality. So there's a universal cell in your body, the natural killer cell, that talks to the T cell, that prevents you from getting cancer. And when it goes down, in whatever form, you get cancer. What's even worse, when you have cancer, the treatments that we've been doing for 45 years inadvertently knocks out your natural killer cells and T cells, which then says that cancer spreads. So that's something I've been fascinated by, and I think we've now finally, through the science of understanding at the cellular level, what's going on in your body when you get cancer.
Why is it that women get cancer more than men?
Well, I don't know if women, it depends on the hormonal, for example, the breast cancer and uterine cancers. I think what I'm really worried about is this virally induced cancers that's happening now. So women, for example, get cervical cancer because of this thing called HPV, the virus, human papillomavirus, and head and neck cancer. We just had a conference now, and the UCLA doctors have now found that if you had a COVID virus infection, you increase the risk of breast cancer. So this combination of inflammation from some infection like COVID, together with a reduction in your protective lymphocytes. These natural killer cells are called lymphocytes, your white cells in your body. Between that combination, you expose and have the risk of cancer.
And when we look at people that maybe were infected with COVID, it feels like a long time ago now, but it actually wasn't that long ago. And people that were busy getting the jabs. I know my wife was very anti, getting it. And I was like, I needed to go and see the kids. And so it was stopping me easily moving around. And so I had the injections and then I had the booster injection. But my wife was like, there's no way on God's earth I'm even going to consider that. When you consider the people that were affected by COVID and the chance of them getting cancer is greater, is that across all age groups, across male and female? Is that unified, or is it?
So we had some disturbing findings recently, and I've been supporting some scientists where not only we think we understand what COVID is doing, it really does perpetuate cancer. So what it does, the spike protein goes into many parts of the body, including the colon, and then it actually reproduces there quietly, just like HPV. And when it causes that level of inflammation, and what it does even worse, it actually suppresses the immune system. And so we are now seeing what I call turbo cancer. I've never in my career seen a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old with metastatic pancreatic cancer, which I'm now seeing, and colon cancer. So my fear is we're going to see, just like HPV, after 5 years in man, if it's true, and we'll be reporting a little bit more of that. I don't want to disturb the world here. A pandemic of cancer.
Wow. Wow. And a pandemic of cancer because it's attacking kids so young, where it never had before.
Because unfortunately, I believe that the vaccine that we got for COVID was the wrong one. Not anti-vaccine, but the wrong one. The vaccine that was developed was what we call an antibody vaccine that tried to block the spike protein. But we all know that that spike protein would actually completely mutate, and you keep on try to block it, but you can never block it because it would go in and never clear the virus. So until you could get a vaccine that would clear the virus, meaning remove it from your body, you would then start instigating either this long COVID, which really is a real thing, or constant inflammation, or persistence of the virus in your body. And we've now shown that in studies, the virus persists. When it does that, you have inflammation and induced cancer. So I think there was a fundamental error in the kind of vaccine that we developed. We should have developed a vaccine that is a T-cell vaccine that could actually clear the virus from your body and prevent transmission even. It is what it is now. The world followed America in getting these antibody-based vaccines based on the lipid particles. And there's no herd immunity because even now you'll get COVID because the virus mutates. And so I think there was a fundamental flaw, sadly, in that decision-making process.
But you knew about this.
So
you knew that the vaccine didn't work. It was the wrong vaccine. You offered to do the boosters. I read and learned about that. And then you were stopped from doing the boosters. This is correct, yeah?
Yes.
And that was charged politically, financially, commercially. What do you think was the real reason that they went, hold on?
To this day, I don't really know. So, I can only surmise. So, and this is when we talk about, just the facts, man. So the idea was during the Trump administration, the first vaccine was developed and Warp Speed was developed. which is fine because it was necessary to prevent deaths. But then you needed a booster after the first antibody vaccine to not just prevent deaths, but prevent transmission. We developed our phase 1 trial and showed that we had the T-cell vaccine. We were the only company that voluntarily gave our vaccine to the NIH to test in monkeys that showed it cleared the virus. And then when we wanted to go into phase 2 as a booster, and this is now during the Biden administration, and I think Javier Becerra was the HHS secretary, Pfizer and Moderna were well into selling their molecule. Francis Collins, who really didn't like very much what we were doing, somehow the FDA came and says, no, you can't go and do that trial. So we took that to South Africa and initiated that trial there and showed indeed we generated T cells against this virus. But by that time, there was no capability of getting the resources or the materials. It was all sucked up by the Pfizers and Modernas of the world. And we just had to give up and focus then on what I'm doing now on the cancer side. However, we are doing trials in long COVID. We are using our drug, our Intiva, to hopefully clear the virus. We're showing we can clear HIV with our virus. We can clear HPV with our vaccine as our virus. I mean, our vaccine, our treatment. So there's hope, but I still believe it could have been different.
I want to talk a lot about cancer and make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about today and the news that you'll be announcing and what came out in Saudi Arabia recently too. There's clearly a lot of people around the world that over and over and over again have had to put their trust in a government only to find that their government fails them. The United States, the United Kingdom, countries in Europe talk about democracy. I live in a country and have done for 21 years where we don't have a democracy and it works just fine. And when you consider take something simple like a Brexit in the UK or two different parties, the blue and the red, whatever it may be in different countries, they're all pushing their sales pitch essentially onto the public to convince the public to vote for them. But their sales pitch never aligns with what they're actually going to do. I look at that and I understand why people don't trust governments in democratic countries, and they lead themselves down the path of conspiracy theories or Illuminati interpretations and stuff like that. And I'm sure you will have opinions on lots of this kind of stuff. But the people need to be able to trust, don't they? They need to be, when it comes to medicine, they need to be able to trust. They shouldn't be walking around saying, you know, the reason there's no cure for cancer is that pharmaceutical companies don't want a cure for cancer, because there's so much pain and suffering that people go through. And there isn't a person that I've ever met that hasn't been touched or moved in some way by a friend, a family member, or a co-worker suffering from cancer. Yet millions goes into cancer research. People run the London Marathon to raise money for cancer research, or all of these different things so that we can find a cure. But we couldn't. Or could we?
So let me give you, in fact, I've been asked by Mike Milken to come give a talk in DC next week at the 50th anniversary of the Nixon, saying we have the war on cancer and why we've not won the war. And so let me give you sort of in a concise way my belief of why we've not won the war, and in a concise way where I think we're on the brink of winning the war, which is good news. I think we've not won the war because we went down this path of developing cancerous drugs based on our collective experience of wartime. So the chemotherapy came out of mustard gas during wartime. The radiation came out of the nuclear bomb of radiation, with the idea, sort of a self satisfying idea. If we give just enough chemotherapy that will actually reduce the tumor without killing you, and radiation that will give enough radiation to reduce the tumor without killing you, and we see the tumor shrink, what we call a response. We were so happy. And in fact, from the NCI to the FDA to the pharmaceutical companies, that was the standard. What was the missing link? As soon as you give the chemotherapy and as soon as you give the radiation of such high dose, you wipe out the missing link of the cell that you didn't realize exists in your body to protect you from cancer, called the natural killer cell. And as I said, I wrote my first paper in 1990. I know to this day that only 3 people read that paper about this.
At least 3 people did.
Yeah, like 3 people did. And so I pursued that concept that if in fact we could understand how to activate that cell and activate the T cell and make them crosstalk to get what we call a memory cell, we would be able to actually eradicate that cancer in your body and have the memory cell prevent it from ever coming back. That's a very different, that is winning the war and not the battle. And it turns out that there's a molecule called IL-15 in your body that actually, when that molecule gets activated, it stimulates and grows your natural killer cells. It stimulates and grows your T cells. It stimulates and grows your memory T cells. So in 2007, the NIH, the NCI, the thought leaders of all the United States did an analysis, 2007, of any molecule, of all the molecules that have the greatest impact of curing cancer. They looked at 124 of them, reduced them down to 20, and then ranked them. And the number 1 ranked molecule was IL-15, which is today Anktiva, 2007. The number 2 ranked molecule was a checkpoint inhibitor, Keytruda and Nivo. So we have spent the last decade now in the United States, and this is how pharma works, creating this checkpoint inhibitor, which is an important molecule, the number 2 drug, the number 2 on the ranking, and given chemotherapy, radiation, and then checkpoint inhibitor. Except if you now go and speak to every oncologist, all these patients on checkpoint inhibitor fail, not because checkpoint inhibitor is bad, because we've been knocking out the NK cells and the T cells. So if you have a checkpoint inhibitor, we're supposed to take the brakes off the T cell, but you have no T cell. That's why it fails. So some of this stuff is really biology, that is just natural biology. So why have we never developed the number 1 ranked molecule? Well, they tried. The NIH tried for 10 years. I tried. And finally, eventually, by 2024, we now have this Anktiva and can be injected as a subcutaneous injection that activates your body, the power within yourself. And I took it public as a company called Immunity Bio and wanted to launch that together with all the other products that needs to be around this NK cell to protect it. And that's what's exciting, because we are there now. We're now seeing patients 10 years free of cancer with bladder cancer, 7 years free with metastatic pancreatic cancer, Merkel cell carcinoma, triple-negative breast cancer, because it's agnostic to the tumor type. This natural killer cell rows around and kills.
Why in the United States did the FDA only approve it for bladder cancer? What was that? There was a logic behind that. Did you think and agree, or did you think that that was preposterous?
Because you're stuck in your old, the polite way to say you're stuck in your old paradigm. The impolite way is there are other motivations, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think I wish the president would actually make a rule that no FDA person could go to Big Pharma for 5 years after the end because they stuck, I still think, in chemotherapy. And the evolution of this enlightenment that maybe you can use, I'm not saying you don't use chemotherapy, but you use it not to kill the natural killer cell, but to stress the tumor and to flush it out so that the natural killer cell could kill it. It's a complete paradigm change. So we did this in bladder cancer, in which the only other alternative is remove your bladder. And we now have patients completely free of disease for 10 years. We have got it approved for patients who failed all BCG. And I'll break some news today. We've now got it approved in all of Europe. So,
Wow.
so it's in Europe, it's in UK, it's US, 33 countries.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. That's satisfying, but not satisfying, because we also shown with single-arm trials in triple-negative breast cancer, in pancreatic cancer, and lung cancer, and renal cancer, that when we activate the tumor, the body with natural killer cells, the same thing, the same molecule that's approved in bladder cancer, we prolong the life statistically of all these cancers or patients, even though we get them when they've failed everything.
So share with me what's happening.
Right.
Tell me what's going on at the moment. Give me some good news, because there's so much going on in the world that's negative. Give me some good news.
Well, what's exciting was we filed for approval for the bladder cancer in Europe. And this very moment, we just heard we got approval. So it's now approved in Europe and approved now in 33 countries. So Europe, USA, UK, and Saudi Arabia.
And does that mean now that because of your work and your belief that it can cure so much more, that step by step other cancers will be approved too?
The good news is that in Saudi, the Saudi FDA has taken that first step already, and they've approved it for lung cancer as well in patients who failed checkpoint inhibitors. So what's exciting now is that I think the realization is that we're onto something really important, meaning that your natural killer cells, your lymphocytes, are probably one of the most essential, if not the most essential cell in your body for life. When I say the word for life, I mean for longevity when you're healthy, or for life when you have a cancer, or for life when you actually get treated with the standards of care that ravages your immune system. So for the first time, there's a solution that was never available in the history of medicine. And it's this molecule called IL-15. And this molecule, ironically, was nominated and ranked by the National Cancer Institute of the United States, the NIH of the United States, the FDA of the United States, and all the thought leaders of cancer doctors as the number one molecule that could cure cancer. So we have, I think, broken the code of your body of how do we activate something that is essential to you living longer in longevity, and how do we actually unlock and unleash this power that's within you when you have cancer.
This is a game changer for so many people. We've all got stories of people that they found out that they were stage 4 of some type of cancer, rather than finding out that they had cancer early. Does it impact greatly the stage that you're at with the work that can be done to resolve it?
Well, and rightly so, when we first started the development of this, we were only allowed, and I said rightly so, to treat patients who had failed everything, which means that they had failed chemo, they had failed radiation, they had failed checkpoint inhibitors. Unfortunately, by that stage, their lymphocytes or their natural killer cells were so low, you sort of climbing out of a hole to restore that. Yet we're able to restore that. We are now moving towards what I call first line, when you're initially diagnosed. And if we did that, it's a crazy concept here again. Imagine using the tumor in your body before it's taken out as the vaccine to your body.
Never.
because what we would do then is give you the NK cells, which would explode these tumors and reveal the antigens to train your T cells and now have memory. So, for example, for brain cancer, as you know, for brain cancer, it's almost an inevitable death sentence, and it should be that way. For 45 years, we've treated brain cancer the same way, meaning chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. Chemotherapy knocks out your NK cells, radiation knocks out them even worse. And then when you do the surgery, you can't really remove all the tumor. So it inevitably comes back, what you call recurrent glioblastoma. And within months, these people don't survive. So we're starting a study now where we're saying the moment you're diagnosed with brain tumor, we want to activate the NK cells, not deactivate them, and then see if we can not only reduce the tumor without radiation, believe it or not, go to surgery, remove the tumor, and then reactivate those NK cells, and even avoid radiation if we could. That trial is about to start. So it's a whole new paradigm change where we've even taken head and neck cancer patients, or we have videos of that we've seen the tumors literally shrink. And it's a kinder, gentler way of treating a cancer patient, but not just so we could satisfy ourselves, but really to drive yourself to complete remission. And because we've activated the power within your body, I want to bring that and am bringing that to the Middle East and bring it to Africa and democratize this so it's available to the world.
That's so good. Now, just asking a few questions about different age groups. If you treat younger patients and you compare that to treating my 80-year-old mother, when we make the comparison between the two, the younger person has a much stronger chance?
Yeah, and the younger person definitely has much. In fact, you can cure most cancers in the pediatric group. Sadly, the way we do it today is we use very much chemotherapy, and then as they get older, they get cancer from what there was the previous treatment before. But the younger people have very strong immune system, called the lymphocytes. And that takes us to the next question. As you age, these NK cells and T cells actually deteriorate. And we have what we call a lymphopenia, meaning the loss of these NK cells. It's a natural path of aging. It's part of the biology of aging. So if we could actually intervene in a natural way in that biology of aging, when as you age, actually supplement those NK cells so they can get up. And the way you supplement them is with an injection subcutaneously of IL-15, which is what your body makes. Suddenly, there's an opportunity to actually prolong longevity and increase health span rather than just lifespan.
So this isn't food, diet and stuff. This is have an injection, what, once a month, once a year?
Well, what we're doing now is beginning that question of, it is food, by the way, and it is diet, and it is sunlight, and it is rest. All of these things actually improve your immune system. So there's not one magic bullet, but as you age, the thymus, where your T cells, that's why it's called T cells from the thymus, actually begin to deteriorate. And you then have a loss of T cells. But we can actually supplement that with giving you IL-15, which stimulates the T cells that currently are in your body. So
If that was a percentage, though, and we were saying, diet, sunshine, vitamin C, the lifestyle choices, these all help with that, and then the opportunity to have the subcutaneous injection, what percentage, in terms of effectiveness, is most?
All of those activities, rest, sunshine, etc., affect you. And the beauty is that all of this could be measured with one single test. It's been hidden in plain sight
What?
for years and years and years. When you do a test that you go measure your hemoglobin to see if you're anemic,
Mm-hmm.
that's called a CBC. You take a blood, a little tube, red tube.
Blood count.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a blood count. Inside that blood count, that is there right now for 20, 30 years, is a thing called absolute lymphocyte count, ALC. That absolute lymphocyte count is the number of your NK and T cells. If it falls below 1,000, you have an 80% chance, increased chance of mortality. If it falls below 1,500, you have a 30% chance of increased mortality. So if we can keep it above 1,500 to 2,000 to 3,000, that is the level that your body demands of immune protection. And that's measurable. Single $10 tests. That's what I meant by this is hidden in plain sight. And there's two crises that we face in humanity. One, aging, which is the opportunity to increase longevity, and two, cancer. And they're interrelated because as your immune system goes down, you have an increased chance of cancer. So people say, well, you get old and you're just going to get cancer. That's just part of aging. No, it's not. If you can actually protect your immune system and restore what I call lymphopenia, increase longevity, you actually can reduce the incidence of cancer. And if you do get cancer, understand that you could then stimulate your NK cells and T cells with IL-15 and prevent high-dose chemotherapy, high-dose radiation. So it's pretty simple yet profound. What are we now finding? All of this is part of evolution. Let me explain that to you. This cell, called the natural killer cell, evolved 450 million years ago in the era of the Cambrian age in order for mammals to survive. In order for you to prevent from infection, this natural killer cell was evolved so that if I took a natural killer cell from you, I could give it to anybody without any matching because it's so conserved. Then over time, and I'll tell you a fun fact, you begin to see that sharks don't get cancer, camels don't get cancer. And I asked myself, why? Well, it turns out over evolution, down to about 50 million years ago, camels made antibodies that are different to what we make. And what are these antibodies? These are these little nanobodies, I call them nantibodies, single-chain antibodies that are so diverse that they could actually kill any infection or bacteria. And because they are these tiny little antibodies, you think of yourself as a pincushion, and it would attach all around the cancer, and the macrophages and natural killer cells will wipe out the cancer. As we've evolved in mankind, the antibodies have now gone into a Y, and they sort of wavy and not as effective in terms of the ability to activate the macrophages and natural killer cells. So if that's the case, then could we generate antibodies that the camel has? And that's why there's this, it's not a myth, where people think they drink camel milk, especially in this region, and feel healthier. It turns out there's antibodies in this camel milk of the camels. So we are now embarking, and this is starting in the United States and United Kingdom. And CRUC, the cancer research of UK, is going to fund the first trial, in first line, by the way, of instituting these antibodies so that they could kill cancer. I want to bring this to the Middle East, and this combined with this IL-15 and combined with the natural killer cells that we could grow is a complete paradigm change of how we would actually address cancer.
That's phenomenal. I mean, you think of that, that's really phenomenal. I as you've said what you said there, I think to myself about people believing, you know, old wives' tales about believing that drinking or eating certain things were good for you, but camel milk actually being able to be something that can help prevent cancer. So something you enjoy while you work towards preventing cancer in your body. How much easier is that to sell to people?
Yeah, but be careful. Unfortunately, there's a catch in that. The antibodies are there if you didn't boil the camel milk. Once you boil the camel milk, you lose the antibodies. But if you don't boil the camel milk, there's a chance of getting brucellosis. So you got to be
Okay.
So,
But you can extract the antibodies from the camel milk?
So how did you get those camel antibodies? Interesting. So the genius of a group of scientists in Quebec, Canada, they took a mouse.
Yeah.
And they took the camel genes and they made a transgenic mouse of camel genes. And the mouse made camel antibodies. So I met some of my colleagues here in Saudi Arabia, and I said, I want to bring you a mouse, but you can't ride it because it's not a camel. But that's very exciting.
Yeah.
So out of that mouse, millions of antibodies evolve, and through AI, we can find the targets in the human body and then take that camel antibody, which I now call an antibody, and grow it and inject it. That's in trials right now.
Earlier in our conversation, you started off and it became quite dark very quickly about the thought of there being a pandemic of cancer. It's almost like you are the solution to that problem. There's lots of brilliant doctors around the world, lots of great researchers around the world, but it feels like you're so mission-led.
I am mission-led, and I think I've been given the privilege and really the gift. Look, I came to this country from South Africa. My salary as a surgical resident was actually in Vancouver, it was $12,000 a year.
Canadian.
Yes. And then I went to Los Angeles and I was working in the VA as a young surgical resident. And it was $22,000. I thought they made a mistake. And then I finished my training. And because I was concerned about my patients receiving this drug Taxol that Bristol Myers was making for cancer, but Taxol was dissolved in castor oil to this day, and we're injecting castor oil into the women, and we're dying, small percentage, but dying from anaphylactic reactions. So there has to be another way. And in my quirky mind, I said there's certain universal truths. Regardless of the tumor type, you lose weight. Why is that? Turns out is that all cancers suck in albumin, which is in your body, and that's where everybody loses weight. So I conceived of the idea, well, instead of having the castor oil to dissolve the Taxol, why don't I put it into a nanoparticle of albumin and feed the tumor rat poison? And the tumor would then shrink, and that's Abraxane. I invented this drug called Abraxane, which is now the proof of breast cancer, lung cancer, and pancreatic cancer. It was the first drug in 40 years. A new drug for pancreatic cancer. It's called Abraxane. And that's what I sold to the pharmaceutical company. So I can go on to this next chapter.
But isn't it interesting how, to go on to the next chapter, everything being mission-led, you sold the business, yes, you raised a lot of money, but from what I've read and understood, you've invested a vast amount of that in going on to solve the next problem.
You know, I've learned from nuns, no money, no mission. And that is what this is all about. I think you live a better life if your life is not about the money, but the mission of which the money could be used for. And that's what we do. So to us, you need the money in order to do this amazing amount of work to support thousands of people. But if you have utilized that for the purpose that's bigger than yourself, the joy that you get back is just immense, right? So
It's
that
like a turbocharged, Popeye eating spinach version of being in service of others in such a huge way, using your skills and your training over the years, that I think sometimes that kind of stuff can get missed. It's like the fire in the belly comes from that.
it does very much so. And the fire in the belly comes from, I was born in South Africa during apartheid. I understand the underdog. My job is to fight for the underdog, always. And what I worried about when I was in the United States, there's a thing called CAR T-cell therapy when people have leukemia, etc. It costs $1 million. So it's only 10,000 of those doses that have been given. Why does it cost 10,000? Why does it cost $1 million? If we could make it $25,000, we could democratize that for the world. Well, we're there because we've invented a robot. We've invented a robot that can manufacture these cells now in real time through using AI and machine vision. And the first robot in the world is about to be installed in next month in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And the next one I'm bringing to Riyadh. And with the commitment that not only is for the Middle East, but for Africa. We did the very first cell therapy in the history of the continent of Africa 15 months ago. The patient's complete remission, now 15 months. So that is sort of the mission, is the joy of this discovery, the joy of seeing the results, but more important, the impact at scale. And if I can do all of that, then I suppose you've led a purposeful life, and that's where we are today.
And it all comes down to mission and purpose in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Just finally, before we finish up here, how long do you think it will take before we know for sure we can rid the world of cancer?
I am hopeful that in my lifetime, because we now understand why it grows. We understand that actually what we've been doing without treatment may inadvertently could exacerbate that growth and metastasis. We understand how to stop that. We understand how to use chemo and radiation in the right way to flush out the tumor. We understand how to use IL-15 to grow your NK and T cells. We understand how to grow memory. And we also understand that longevity requires your lymphocytes to be at a level. And finally, we can measure it easily. All those components have just happened in the last 10 years of our work.
And my final question, after what's just happened in Saudi Arabia, with the approval for not only bladder but lung too, do you think this part of the world wants to be at the forefront of solving these problems and is going to drive that just as much as anywhere in the world? Or really, could it be a pioneer in this?
I think they're going to be pioneering. In fact, the beauty of this part of the world, they have a clean slate. There was no pharmaceutical business, no biotech business, no sort of perverse interest of maintaining your business, and more importantly, the youth. So there's a study that just completed that showed that 1 in 5 Americans are at risk with lymphopenia with a high chance of early mortality. But 1 year of increased life and longevity results in $38 trillion to the GDP, published by the Business School of London and Harvard and Oxford. So even just on the economic basis, on the GDP basis. But this region where oil and natural gas was, if they diversified into the idea of the biologic cell therapy, immunotherapy, as the next evolution of pharmaceuticals, I believe we could bring the most modernized biotech industry to this region. And that's one of the things. I'll be working with Saudi Arabia, and I'm here now in the UAE and with the Qataris. who can afford to bring this to their nations and for their people. And I'm really excited about that because I see the opportunity. I see the desire to want to change things. And this is a real diversification for good. So I'm excited about helping in any way I can.
Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, I can't thank you enough for coming to share your wisdom and your expertise with us today. Thanks for coming to join us on the show.
You're welcome.
Awesome.